Salt burned the wound, but not as much as the memory. The man we dragged from the southern coast wasn't begging for water. He wasn't even bleeding anymore. His lips were cracked open by the sun, and one of his eyes had turned to glass from staring too long at something only he could see. His name was Jacques Marceau, or so he claimed. But he spoke like someone who'd left that name at the bottom of the sea. He wore the tattered coat of a captain, but his wrists told a different tale. Bruised, scarred and marked by the frayed end of a severed rope, like he'd been torn from a mast during a storm, or worse, during a betrayal. We should have left him there. We should have walked away. But when a man murmurs, he still sails, with a voice heavy like an anchor, you listen, or you curse yourself for the rest of your days, because Jacques never said the name, but we all knew who he meant, Blackbeard. And this is one of those pirate stories that was never meant to be told. The kind whispered over spilled rum, between thunderclaps and prayers. The gold was cursed, yes, but it was my name they screamed in the dark. Welcome to the channel, The Pirate's Diary. If tales of pirates, lost oaths and cursed gold stir something in you, the sea keeps its stories, but only for those who dare to remember. Will you join the crew? Subscribe and step aboard. The blade still trembled in Jacques' hand when the moonlight caught the dried blood on his palm. Not fresh, old, a wound, sealed years ago beneath the moon of Tortuga, the night they carved loyalty into their flesh and swore to never break it. They called themselves La Hermandad de los Traidores, though back then they were just the Brotherhood of Blood. Pirates bound not by gold, but by pain. Oaths sworn with the steel of a dagger and the sting of salt. Jacques had once been the second in command aboard the Port-au-Crâne, a vessel that never flew colors and never left survivors. But that was before the storm, before the island, before he broke the only oath that had ever meant anything. Now his fingers couldn't stop shaking, not because of age, not because of drink, but because the sea remembers. And so does he. It happened on the black shores of St. Croix. The trees there bent with the weight of whispers, and the sand always felt colder than it should. They were meant to ambush a British galleon rumored to be carrying obsidian relics, fragments of a forgotten empire carved into a map. But the map was cursed, and so was the betrayal. Jacques ran when the first cannon struck. He didn't shout for the others. He didn't look back. He fled through smoke and iron, clutching the obsidian map against his chest like it was his own lifeline, or maybe his damnation. He left Blackbeard behind, surrounded, bleeding, outnumbered, and worse, abandoned. Jacques never spoke his name again, not out of shame, out of fear that saying it aloud would summon him from the depths. Because some ghosts don't need graves. They need only silence to grow stronger. They say the obsidian map was not inked by man, that the roots it showed changed with the moon, that every line drawn was a scar carved into the skin of a dying god. Jacques thought he could sell it, thought he could bury the past in coin and rum, but everywhere he went, the Gulf of Guinea, the rock caves of Cape Verde, even the brothels of Cartagena, someone had already heard the tale. The man who betrayed Blackbeard. They never said his name, but they always knew it was him. And one by one, the crew that followed him began to disappear. Some vanished during storms that never touched other ships. Some were found with their palms sliced open, as if someone was undoing their oath. Jacques started sleeping with his boots on, started dreaming of the moment the map turned warm in his hands, not from fire, not from sun, but from something breathing beneath it. One night, he woke to a whisper, not in his ear, in his blood. You never left Tortuga. You only sailed farther into the curse. He burned the map that night, or tried to. The flames screamed, and in the ashes he saw the silhouette of a man he thought was long dead, standing at the edge of the fire, watching with eyes that held storms. Blackbeard, not as he was, but as something worse, a shadow shaped by betrayal, a man who had drowned once and come back without needing air. Jacques dropped to his knees, whispering the name he had not dared to utter in a decade. Capitaine! But the figure was already gone. Only the smell of smoke and salt remained, and a new scar on his palm, fresh, deep, still bleeding. Now he waits in forgotten ports, sleeps on docks no ship dares anchor beside, drinks alone, not to forget, but to delay remembering. Some say he's mad, others say he's marked. But he knows the truth. Maps can be burned, gold can be spent, but a broken oath follows you. He still hears the drums from the Brotherhood's rituals, still sees the moonlight on blades, still feels the blood trickling into the sand. And sometimes when the sea is quiet, too quiet, he swears he sees a black sail on the horizon. No wind, no flag, no mercy. I left my captain to die, but the sea refused to take him. And the sea never forgets. The rum trembled inside the jar before Jacques even touched it. A shadow had passed, not across the room, but through him. He looked down and saw the envelope, black as storm water, thick as wet parchment, tucked beneath the rim of his drink like a blade waiting to be drawn. No one had seen who left it, not the barkeep, not the card players, not the woman singing near the back. But Jacques felt it, like cold fingers on his neck. He reached for it slowly, as if touching it too fast might wake something buried. No name, no seal, no return, only a symbol pressed into the wax, a skull biting a compass. He stared at it until the sweat on his palms made the ink smear, until the room felt smaller, until the lanterns flickered, even though the wind had died outside. Then he opened it. Inside was a single line, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, cracked from age but still dark enough to whisper, "Return it before the waxing moon, or the sea will come for you." Jacques dropped the letter like it burned, but it wasn't the threat that made his hands shake. It was the handwriting. He'd seen it before, carved into wood, signed on orders, scrawled into the corner of a map the world was never meant to follow. It was the script of a man he had watched burn alive, tied to the mast of his own ship. Blackbeard, 12 years. That's how long Jacques had run, from coast to coast, island to island, always just ahead of whatever waited in the dark. He had sold pieces of the map, bartered legends for food, whispered lies into the ears of dying men. But nothing had ever followed him this far, until now. He sat in silence, fingers brushing the parchment like it might vanish if he blinked. Around him, the tavern carried on. Laughter, dice, the scrape of chairs against wood. But inside Jacques, the world had gone still, like the moment right before a storm splits the mast. He whispered to himself, barely audible over the noise, "I saw him die. I watched him burn." And yet the letter smelled of sea brine and ash, like it had come from the wreckage itself. He left the tavern before the jar was half empty, walked the twisted alleys of Havana, boots dragging through puddles that mirrored a sky, too quiet for comfort. He needed air, but the air brought salt, and the salt brought memories. There was only one thing the letter could mean, not vengeance, not a ghost's warning, but a summons. Because Jacques still had something he was never meant to keep. The final shard of the obsidian map. He had hidden it in the ribs of a dead whale off the coast of Baracoa, sealed in tar and bone. Not even he had gone back for it. The map had cost too many lives already, too many scars, too many nights where sleep came only after the bottle ran dry. But now it was calling. And if Blackbeard's hand, dead or not, had written this letter, then the sea was moving again. Jacques looked to the sky. The moon was almost at half. 3 nights, maybe 4. He didn't fear death anymore, not after all he had seen. But there was something worse than death. Something with no eyes, no sails, no voice, only tides that dragged you without leaving blood behind. He had seen it once. The sea when it's angry, not waves, not wind, but the sea itself, alive, watching, judging, and now it was coming. He returned to his room above the smokehouse and lit a candle with shaking hands, the flame bent sideways, not from breeze, from breath. Jacques didn't look behind him, didn't need to. He just stared at the letter. The words seemed darker now, wet, like they were bleeding again. And in the corner of the page, something new had appeared, a drop of black ink that pulsed once, then vanished. "I watched him burn," Jacques whispered again, "but fire can't touch the sea." Outside, a gull screamed and fell from the sky. The tide rose 6 inches in an hour, no wind, no warning, and somewhere far out on the Caribbean, beneath a sky torn open by lightning, a ship with black sails moved against the current. No crew, no name, just a compass in the mouth of a skull carved into the figurehead, and a voice that had not been heard in 12 years. "Bring it back, or drown in the silence you gave me." The sea remembers, and now it wants what was stolen. The sea was silent the night Jacques unfolded the map again. Not quiet, silent, no wind, no waves, not even the creak of his ship's timbers, only the soft rasp of parchment worn thin by salt and years. The obsidian map didn't whisper directions like the others. It watched you, judged you. No coordinates, no lines, only symbols. An anchor turned upside down, a closed eye, inked in something that shimmered like dried blood. And beneath it all, a warning in Latin, carved deep into the hide, "Sacrilegium mare vindicate." The sea reclaims the blasphemer. Jacques ran his finger over the ink with a hand that no longer felt heat. He didn't need stars to know where he was going. Some places you remember with your soul. The sailors called them the Islas Sombras, shadow isles, a broken chain of black stone and cursed wind, far beyond any Spanish patrols. Once a prison, later a graveyard. The stories said the crown abandoned. Plague-ridden slaves there, but the truth was darker. The abandoned had survived, and in the dark they had learned to pray, not to saints, not to Christ, but to something older, something beneath. Jacques had seen the carvings once, deep in the island caves, where no fire lasted more than a minute. Shapes that didn't belong to any world he knew, eyes without faces, limbs that bent the wrong way. But none of that had stopped him. Not then. He had come to hide what couldn't be buried on any holy land. Not just the gold he stole from the Port-au-Cran, not just the rubies blackened by fire, but the box, the bone-sealed box. He carried it himself, wrapped in sailcloth soaked in rum and salt. No one else aboard dared touch it. Some refused even to look at it, said they could hear something inside, like breathing, slow and hollow, like wind through rotting teeth. But Jacques knew what it held, or rather, who. They said it was the heart of a traitor, still warm, still beating, still damned. His. He found the cave at dusk, the mouth yawning like a wound in the cliffside. The tide fought him with every step, like the sea itself wanted to drag him back. But Jacques had made his choice. He placed the gold deep in the back, where no light reached. Then he set the box atop it, not with care, but with the desperation of a man burying a memory that refused to die. He whispered no prayer, only one line, to no one, to everything. "Take it and forget me." Then he sealed the cave with fire, collapsing the entrance in a rain of ash and smoke. But as he sailed away, he looked back once, and the stone had changed from smooth gray to blackened bone. Years passed, but the memory didn't. He still felt the pull in his chest, like something missing had never truly left. He still dreamed of the box, not opened, not touched, just waiting. Sometimes he heard it in the waves, a soft thump, thump, like a heartbeat echoing through salt water. Sometimes he saw it in his cup. The way, rum darkened suddenly, then cleared, as if something had passed through it. And always, always, he felt watched. The obsidian map was supposed to be unreadable, but Jacques understood its silence better than any voice. The symbols had changed, grown sharper. The closed eye now bled, the anchor now pointed down, like a weight dragging a soul to the bottom. And the Latin, once etched clean, now dripped, as if carved into raw flesh. He tried to burn it again, but the fire refused to catch. And when he tossed it into the sea, the waves pushed it back, unfolded, dry. They say no one sails to the Shadow Isles anymore. Ships disappear before the fog even lifts. Compasses spin like they're laughing. But Jacques knows the way. He always has. Because some maps don't show places, they show sins, and some boxes don't keep what's inside from getting out. They keep the world from letting it back in. I buried my own heart in those caves, Jacques once whispered to a deaf priest in Veracruz. Not to silence it, but so it would never forgive me. And on nights when the moon rises too fast, when the wind dies and the gulls vanish, some sailors swear they hear a heartbeat beneath the waves, calling, waiting, counting down to the next crescent moon. The shadow that sails without wind, rewritten for the pirate's diary, approx 4,500 characters. On the third day at sea, the sky closed like a wound that refused to bleed. The wind vanished. The gulls disappeared. Even the stars, constant, companions of every cursed sailor, refused to shine. There was only the broomer, thick, wet, suffocating. It clung to skin like regret. Jacques stood at the helm, knuckles white, breath held tight in his lungs. The crew whispered of storms. But this wasn't a storm. Storms move, storms warn. This was the sea forgetting to breathe. Then they saw it. It came not from the horizon, but from below. The water split open without a sound, and from its black mirror rose a ship, long thought to be lost. Reina del Abismo, the queen of the abyss, Baba Negra's final vessel, scuttled, burned, swallowed whole by the Caribbean 12 years ago in a battle no one survived except the legends. And now it rose. Not with force, not with fury, with certainty. Her sails were torn like old flesh, yet they moved. There was no wind, but they breathed. Her timbers groaned, not from age, but from memory. The wheel turned slowly, precisely, but no hands guided it. And on the prow stood him, Edward Thatch, Blackbeard. But not as Jacques remembered, not the man who drank rum like blood, not the captain who carved silence with his stare. This figure did not breathe, did not sway, did not blink. He was not a man, he was a debt. Jacques fell to his knees. His mouth moved, but no sound came. Because this wasn't a ghost. Ghosts linger. This was something deeper, something owed. The crew dropped their weapons. One man jumped overboard, only to vanish without a splash. The fog thickened, circling the ship, like a noose. Then the Reina del Abismo passed them, without touch, without wave, and her shadow fell across their deck like a veil of mourning. For a moment, Jacques looked into her shattered windows and saw something moving inside. Not men, not corpses, but memories. His, theirs, all of them, everything they'd buried, everything they'd betrayed. The sea had remembered. He gripped the rail with bleeding hands, eyes locked on the figure at the prow. Blackbeard did not look back. He didn't need to, because Jacques knew this wasn't a warning. It wasn't even a message. It was collection. When the fog finally broke and the stars returned like timid survivors, the sea was calm. But nothing else was. Half the crew refused to speak. One man tore out his own compass and threw it into the ocean. The youngest sailor sat by the mast, repeating the same word until his voice cracked. Debtor, Debtor, debtor. And Jacques, he went below deck, opened the lockbox. He swore he'd never touch again, and took out the last fragment of the obsidian map. It beat once in his hand, like a pulse under skin, because now he knew. You can burn the maps, sink the ships, bury the gold, forget the names, but the sea doesn't care about gold. The sea collects what it's owed. I saw him again, Jacques would later whisper to a blind fisherman in Santiago, but it wasn't Barba Negra. It was the cost of betraying him. Some say the Reina del Abismo still sails. No wind, no crew, just shadows, and a captain made, not of flesh, but of debt left unpaid. And when she passes, the sea falls silent, because every wave knows her name, and every soul lost at sea. The deck didn't creak, the wind didn't move, even the lantern flames bowed low, as if afraid to witness what was coming. He didn't appear with thunder or steel. He walked through the crew frozen in place, through air so cold it cracked the lips and stung the lungs. Jacques felt the board shift beneath him, each footstep behind him as heavy as the weight on his soul. He didn't turn, he didn't have to. He knew the gate, measured, calm, final. Blackbeard. Barba Negra said nothing at first. Silence fell like a burial shroud. Then, in a voice that didn't rise, didn't need to, he spoke. Do you remember what you swore? Jacques felt his knees fail, not from fear, from shame. The oath. That cursed night in Tortuga, blood dripping into sand, blades pressed against palms, not for riches, not for power, for brotherhood, and he had broken it. Jacques couldn't speak. Guilt had drowned his voice long before the sea ever tried. His mouth opened, but no air came, only memory. The fire, the betrayal. The treasure weighed heavier than a man's word. And then Blackbeard stepped in front of him. No blade in hand, no pistol, just a single coin, old, golden, its edges worn down by years of salt and blood, etched with the symbol from the letter, a skull biting a compass. You swore there would be no gold worth more than a brother, Blackbeard said, holding the coin between two fingers like it was the last truth Jacques had left. The crew didn't breathe. Even the sea waited. Jacques looked into the eyes of the man he had betrayed, or what remained of him. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't rage. It was judgment. Return it, Blackbeard said, his voice as steady as a tide, or the sea will take everything. And Jacques believed him, because it wasn't a threat. It was a law, older than kings, older than ships, older than Jacques himself. The kind of law the sea never forgets. He reached slowly for the coin, hand trembling not from fear, but the weight of all that came before. And as his fingers touched the gold, a cold rush surged through him, as if every lie he'd ever told was being pulled from his veins. Blackbeard did not smile, did not blink. He simply turned, walked back through the crew, whose eyes were wide and wet with terror, though none knew why they were crying. Only that something sacred had passed among them. Jacques remained on his knees long after Blackbeard disappeared into mist. The coin in his palm burned like fire beneath the skin, but it wasn't heat. It was memory. It was weight. It was the price of the oath. That night, the sea rose without wind. The tide climbed higher than the stars, and from somewhere far in the dark came the sound of a voice not made of flesh. Brotherhood is not broken by betrayal, but by forgetting it ever mattered. And so Jacques wept, not for the gold, not for the curse, but for the promise he had shattered, a promise the sea would now keep, one way or another. The first step ashore was like crossing into a grave that still remembered its dead. The earth was cracked and dry, as if the island itself refused to breathe. No trees, no birds, just the sound of wind scraping across twisted wooden crosses, hundreds of them leaning like broken teeth across the hills. Jacques said nothing. Neither did the crew. No one asked what this place was. Because some islands don't need names. They speak through absence, and through the eyes that blinked in the undergrowth, dark, unblinking, watching without moving, the island of black voices. He walked without looking up, led by memory alone, each step heavier than the last. Sweat ran cold down his spine. The air reeked of old rot, like a wound left open too long. And then he found it. The place where the soil had once turned soft, where the sea could no longer reach. He dropped to his knees and began to dig. No shovel, no tools, just bare hands against dirt and rock and bone. The crew stood back, silent, their eyes darting to the jungle where the whispers never stopped. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere, like voices drowning and praying at the same time. Some men crossed themselves, others wept quietly, but no one dared stop him. Blood ran down Jacques' fingers, mixing with the soil, staining the bones buried in the dirt. And then his hand struck it. Wood. Rough. Cold. Familiar. The box, wrapped in fraying cloth, sealed with wax and thread and time. He pulled it free, teeth clenched, breath ragged. The air seemed to thicken around him as he unwrapped it, each knot harder than the last, as if the box didn't want to be seen again. And when it opened, the gold inside shone like it had been forged from sin itself, still warm, still cursed. But the gold wasn't what froze him. It was the cloth beneath it, black, rotten, etched with the skull of the poor Ocran. The old banner they once sailed under, now torn and crawling with worms. Jacques stared at it as if it could speak, and in a way, it did, because behind him came the voice he had feared even more than death. Is this what a brotherhood is worth? Jacques didn't turn. He didn't have to. The voice was Barbanegra's, not loud, not cruel. Worse, disappointed. The kind of voice that doesn't need to shout, because it already knows it's been heard. Jacques lowered his head. He wanted to speak, to explain, to beg, to curse, to deny, but no words came. His lips moved, only tears did. Barbanegra stepped closer. The ground didn't shift. The jungle went quiet. Even the whispers stopped. And still Jacques wept. Not for the gold, not for the curse, but for the man he used to be. For the faces that would never return, for the nights filled with laughter, rum and songs they thought would never end. All gone, all traded, for a box of rot. Some say they saw the ghost of the port Ocran anchored offshore. That night, her torn sails fluttering without wind, her crew standing at attention, hollow-eyed and silent. Some say the jungle opened and swallowed the rest of the men one by one. Only Jacques returned, and when he did, his hands were still bleeding, still holding the coin, still whispering the name of the captain he betrayed. The sea has always loved treasure, but what it loves more is regret. And on certain nights, when the tide pulls too hard and the winds cry through the rigging, you can hear them. The black voices, still whispering, still watching, still waiting for what was never truly returned. They didn't tie him with rope. They tied him with broken oaths. Jacques stood against the rotting mast of La Reina del Abismo, arms spread like a penitent nailed to memory. The wood was cold, wet with something that wasn't water, and though no chains held him, he couldn't move. Because this ship did not bind the body, it bound the soul. Around him, the fog pulsed like a living thing. Each breath of it dragged a whisper across his skin. Names he hadn't spoken in years, laughter turned to weeping, songs that ended in screams. And then the dead stepped forward. They came from the mist like forgotten prayers. Faces half-eaten by time, eyes hollow as the sea, skin cracked with salt and sorrow, his old brothers. One by one, the men he had sailed with, bled with, betrayed. None of them moved like men. They floated, drifted, hands outstretched, not to strike him, but to show him what he left behind. "I didn't die for gold," one whispered, voice soft as sand falling through bone. "I died because you chose yourself." Another stepped closer, face twisted in anguish. "I screamed your name as I sank, and you never turned back." A third voice, barely more than breath, shivered through the deckboards. "You broke the oath, not with a blade, but with silence." Jacques tried to speak. Nothing came. His throat held only guilt, thick and sharp like shattered glass. He looked down. His hands weren't bound. They were open, bleeding, as if every oath he'd sworn had torn its way back out. Then came Baba Negra. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His boots sank deep into the sand of the ship's lower deck, though no sand should have been there. The sea had brought it with him, like a reminder that this wasn't a trial, it was consequence. In his hand, a torch. Its flame didn't flicker, didn't dance. It waited. Then he dropped it. Not on Jacques, not on the mast, but on the yarn sand. And the moment it touched, the voices, the dead, ignited. But there was no fire, no smoke, only sound. Their screams weren't screams, they were words, poured from broken mouths like molten lead. Every oath Jacques had broken, every name he never said again, every plea he had drowned with rum and forgetfulness, now they burned around him. A storm of promises that refused to die. He shut his eyes, but he still saw them, still heard them. A crew he'd once called brothers, now judges, not asking for vengeance, only truth. And in the silence between their words, he realized something worse than death. They hadn't come to punish him. They had come to forgive him. But the sea never would. Baba Negra stepped back, not in anger, not in triumph, but in mourning. And as the ship faded once more into mist, Jacques remained at the mast, unbound, untouched, but broken, because no flame scars deeper than the kind that burns without fire. On calm nights, when the water is too still and the moon hangs too low, sailors say they see him, a lone man, arms outstretched against an invisible mast, whispering the names of the dead to the wind, not to remember them, but to beg them not to speak back. At dawn, the sea turned to glass. No wind, no birds, no sound beyond the breath of waves too gentle to be trusted. And there, between the bleeding edge of night and the first light of morning, they placed him in the boat. No oars, no sail, no compass, not even a name carved into the wood. Just Jacques, stripped of everything but memory. He sat alone, motionless, eyes hollow, not by choice. He had been blinded, his mouth stitched in silence, his body untouched, but his soul flayed open. The small vessel drifted with a current no chart had ever shown, not toward land, not toward storm, toward absence. And on the shore of that forgotten island, at the edge of the world where the dead still whisper, Blackbeard watched. He did not wave, he did not speak, he did not curse, because there was no need. Some punishments aren't loud, some are eternal. The crew stood behind him, silent as gravestones, their faces pale with the weight of what they had seen. None dared ask why Jacques had been spared, because they knew. The sea had not rejected him. It had claimed him, not to kill, not to forgive, but to leave him awake. He floated for days, or weeks, maybe years. Time bent itself around the boat like mist, heavy, clinging, circular. No sunburn, no hunger, no sleep, only memories. They came like waves, crashing in his skull again and again, the names, the faces, the eyes that had stared up from the deep, not in anger, but in disbelief. He remembered them all now. The cook who shared his last biscuit, The boy who sang to drown out cannon fire, the brother who bled out calling his name, every soul he had traded for gold, every oath drowned beneath silence. He could not scream, he could not weep. But inside something broke and kept breaking, over and over, like a mast splitting under ghost wind. The sea rocked him gently, lovingly, like it wanted him to stay alive, to feel, because that was the sentence. Not fire, not blade, not death, but remembrance. Sometimes, when the fog parts on still waters, fishermen say they see a shape adrift in the dawn. A small boat too old to float, and inside a man, blind, mouth closed by salt and sorrow, skin pale as bone. He does not call for help, he cannot, but his head tilts slightly when names are spoken, as if he knows them, as if he's keeping count. "The sea didn't want me dead," Jacques once wrote with a broken nail into the side of his boat. "It wanted me to remember." And so he drifts still, not cursed, not damned, just awake, forever. A lantern floated in the black water, the flame still flickering though the ship it belonged to was gone. Behind it, just beyond the mist, a shadow moved across the horizon, the shape of a mast, broken, but standing. No sails, no flags, just a figure carved against. The stormlight, staring into a sea that no longer answered. And on the shore, buried under stone and silence, sat a lone grave, no name, no cross, only a rusted compass jammed into the earth, its needle forever pointing toward a place no map dares mark. They say that's where it ended, but the sea doesn't believe in endings. He drifts still, no face, no voice, not even breath, just the memory of what he used to be. Some call him a ghost, others say he's a warning, but those who've seen him know the truth. He's not there to haunt the living, he's there to remember the dead who trusted him, the dead he left behind, the dead who still whisper in every ripple that touches the hull of passing ships. Jacques broke something that day, not just a promise, not just a brotherhood. He broke the weight of the oath itself, because it wasn't gold that cursed them, it was what they gave up to chase it. The warmth of a crew, the laughter in a storm, the name that once meant loyalty, all of it gone. And Blackbeard, he never vanished. Not truly. His legend became a shadow stitched into every tide, a whisper beneath every wave. He doesn't sail for glory, he doesn't sail for vengeance. He sails for justice, for the brotherhood that was torn apart, for the voices that never made it home. And when La Reina del Abismo rises once more from the depths, with her silent deck, her torn banner, her crew of forgotten oaths, she doesn't come to destroy. She comes to ask, what did you do when no one was watching? Who did you leave behind? And why are your hands still stained with salt? There is no peace for the faithless, not in these waters, not in the stories buried beneath them. And the man in the drifting boat? He repeats one name, over and over, not with lips, but with the last thing he still owns, remembrance. Barba Negra, not the man, the symbol of every promise broken, of every oath whispered in the dark, of every ghost the sea refuses to let go. He warned them, and they didn't listen. Now he's part of every storm that doesn't break, every tide that pulls too hard, every silence that feels like it's watching you back. And so I ask you, sailor to sailor, did you already know this forgotten part of the story? And if you had been on that ship, what would you have done? What other sea stories deserve to be told here before they vanish for good? If this story touched you in any way, don't let it vanish like so many other names the sea has taken. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Keep hearing what was never meant to be forgotten, because the pirate's diary doesn't end. It waits.